Donc je vais profiter de ce temps pour commencer à vous parler de l'intervenant que nous accueillons ce soir, le professeur Marcel Salathe. C'est une personne qui représente particulièrement bien le thème des enjeux mondiaux. On pourrait presque dire qu'il les incarne pour différentes raisons. La première, c'est qu'il se situe aux interfaces. Et donc, cette approche interdisciplinaire sur laquelle vous allez travailler, c'est une approche qu'il vit au quotidien. Marcel Salathe est biologiste de formation. Il a fait son master à l'université de Bâle. Ensuite, il a fait son doctorat à l'ETHZ. Puis, il est parti faire une carrière de recherche aux États-Unis. Il a été à Stanford pour faire son post-doctorat. Et là, il avait une bourse Branco-Weiss qui lui a donné beaucoup de liberté dans sa recherche. Puis, il est devenu professeur assistant à l'université de Pennsylvanie et à Stanford également. Et en 2015, il est revenu en Suisse, à l'EPFL ici. Et là, il est rattaché à deux facultés, faculté des sciences de la vie et faculté informatique et communication. Son laboratoire, d'ailleurs, qui est le laboratoire d'épidémiologie digitale, représente bien cette double affiliation. C'est une personne qui est à l'interface aussi entre l'académie et la société civile. De même, je dirais, interface entre les sciences et l'art. Il a d'ailleurs un cours qui s'intitule The Science Film Hackathon. Et on voit qu'il vise à enseigner aux scientifiques et aux artistes à collaborer. Deuxième raison, c'est les sujets sur lesquels il travaille, qui le préoccupent. Ces sujets-là s'inscrivent parfaitement dans les modules, qui sont les modules de ce cours des enjeux mondiaux. Il y a par exemple la santé, donc effectivement l'épidémiologie digitale, il vous en parlera certainement. La nutrition aussi, sujet sur lequel il a travaillé récemment avec un projet important de recherche. L'agriculture, pareil, avec une application, je ne sais pas s'il en parlera, vous verrez. Je dirais l'accès au savoir aussi, l'accès ouvert au savoir qui est un de ses grands sujets. Il a créé la plateforme Crowd AI, qui est une plateforme qui organise des hackathons sur des bases d'open data. Et d'ailleurs, tout récemment, ici, dans cette salle, il a organisé avec d'autres personnes les Applied Machine Learning Days, qui étaient 4 journées de workshops et de présentations de conférences, lors desquelles il y avait énormément d'énergie dans cette salle. Extrêmement intéressant de voir toutes les personnes ici rassemblées sur ce thème-là. Et ça me permet de vous dire une dernière chose qui est intéressante aussi avec ce professeur, c'est que c'est quelqu'un qui voit d'abord le possible avant de voir l'impossible. Et c'est une démarche globalement extrêmement intéressante. Voilà, donc je vous laisse avec lui. Et gardez vos questions pour dans 25 minutes, puisqu'il y aura aussi une demi-heure de questions-réponses avec lui. Voilà, je vous remercie d'accueillir le professeur Marcel Salathe.
All right. I would like to talk to you about this title, which I think you are the generation that understands this best, the emojis. Optimism in the age of technology. I posted this on Twitter and one person said this could also mean, he interpreted it to say, now is a good time to buy an Apple computer. But that's not what it is. It's really this optimism in the age of technology. A subtitle that I also try to express with emojis, if you can read this maybe. It means building Swiss technology with a pioneering spirit. And unfortunately, I couldn't really find a good emoji for pioneering, so I took the US flag. Okay, no nation thinking involved here. But I think, the US still sort of represents this kind of pioneering spirit. So go do it. And why should we talk about this? It's partially because I want to enthuse, hopefully, some of that spirit into you. If you look at this slide, that's quite an astonishing slide. I haven't seen quite a slide like this for a long time. This denotes the speed of technology. How fast is technology adopted? And you can see there are things like electricity, the telephone, radio that took decades to be adopted. And adopted here just simply means it's been adopted by a quarter of the population in the US. That's one measure. You could take many, but this is one. Because then you know, okay, it's going to go mainstream. And then you see PCs and mobile phones. We're going down to a decade. And now smartphone and voice assistants have spread within single-digit years, 2 years. And so in historical times, that means instantly. So new technology comes out, that's great. Instantly it will be adopted very quickly by the entire world population. That changes everything, it changes society, it changes business and so on. And of course this is only going to go one way. There's not much way to go, but there's only going to go one way. So what is happening here? Well, one thing is happening that Moore's law just will not stop. It just does not seem to want to stop. And that's, of course, this law, which is more like an observation, that describes that the numbers of transistors double roughly every 2 years. So that means computers roughly get twice as powerful as 2 years before. People like to show this in a log scale because it's a constant rate. I occasionally prefer to show this in a linear scale, so just that you can see the explosion in computing power that's now available, and that will just continue to increase. The other thing that's happened, of course, is that every human is getting connected. That means every piece of information that's out there instantly is everywhere. So the green line here that you see is the adult population. The purple line is something my generation was pretty excited about, the PC revolution. And then the blue curves, which happened even faster, and as you can see, much bigger, were the phone revolutions and the smartphone revolutions. That's unheard of. And you can see now already over half of the adult global population is connected to phones and to the internet. And phones, of course, are devices that are by definition connected. So that leads, that of course has tremendous impacts on the economy, as we now see all around us. And it's no accident that the top valued companies in the world have now been, for a couple of years, technology companies. And when I say technology companies, I need to remind you that all companies are now technology companies. Some just don't know it yet. Usually that doesn't end well for them, but they're all technology companies. You can also see that they're all US companies, and we come back to that in a minute. By the way, I think Amazon has, this is for data from the end of last year, end of 2017. Amazon has, in the past 3 months, added 200 billion to its market capitalization. That's one Nestle in 3 months. So everything is being completely changed, every field you can imagine. I want to give you a few examples. Health, as was said, is something I care about. I know you care about because you care about your own health. So look at these watches, for example, on the left, and this device in the middle top that is a glucose sensor. We call them wearables. That's quite funny, isn't it? I mean, I'm wearing one, but I'm also wearing this, and I'm also wearing this, but I have proper names for these. But things happen so fast that we didn't even come up with a proper name for what this is, so we just call it wearable. It measures things about your health. So it will replace a lot of what's happening in hospitals and in doctors, which is usually taking your vitals, measuring things about you. And at the moment, it's a super fascinating example of people just saying, yeah, but these are just toys. What is this good for? We'll come back to that topic a lot. On the top right, you see a chatbot, medical chatbot. You can have a conversation with a medical chatbot about your health instead of your doctor. Well, is that really a good idea, you ask? Well, consider that this chatbot, artificial intelligence powered, may have seen millions of patients, remembers every single detail about these patients, has also read the entirety of medical and scientific literature, keeps reading all scientific literature in real time. So now, is it a good idea or not to chat with this chatbot? And at the bottom, you can see an example of digital epidemiology, large technology companies being able to track things much faster, track diseases much faster than public health officials. Does not fully function all the time, but we're improving and it's getting better by the day. Another example of a company that was recently here on stage, an Israeli startup that's using artificial intelligence to interpret medical images, which is what normally doctors used to do. Now technology is taking over that job, can potentially do it much better, and these guys say now we can do it for $1 per scan. You can imagine this is going to change everything in this field. Transportation. Transportation, I used to think of as super boring field. I mean, you bring people from A to B in a bus or train, big deal. What's the big deal? I was totally wrong about this. I think it's now one of the most exciting areas you can think of because we're moving from cars that we have to drive to self-driving cars. That makes, and then of course the whole issue from petrol to electric as well, but just the self-driving makes the whole thing a completely different ballgame. Why? Because car ownership will actually stop making sense. The only reason why you own a car and you always have it with you is because you have to drive it, so it needs to be with you. That's why we need parking in the first place. But if a car can just go once it dropped you off, then you don't need parking anymore. And so tons of examples like that. Car ownership will collapse. That means the whole industry around insurance and so on will completely change. New businesses will come up. Very fascinating. You can re-envision what cities look like. We have some of these core concepts developed here at EPFL. Most excitingly to me is this thing at the bottom here, where fully autonomous vehicles are predicted to reduce accidents by 95%. Keep in mind that this year in Europe, about 100,000 people will die because of car accidents. About 200,000 people in the US, about 1.2 million in the world. And that does not even include the people who get seriously injured. That's just death. So if you can cut that with technology by 95%, it's a major public health breakthrough. Food. Getting your groceries directly from the store in one way or the other, having personalized meals adapted to your microbiome, what have you, tracking what you eat all the time, having a complete overview over that, that's also completely going to change. Here's an Amazon Go store that was recently introduced. You walk in, you scan your phone like in a subway station. These things here at the top are not, vent ducts or anything like that. These are cameras, hundreds of cameras that do complete surveillance, of course, and that see when you put something in your bag and automatically charge your credit card. Great or not, I leave that open to you, but this is happening. Agriculture, I can very quickly go through this slide because one of the previous groups provided a beautiful summary, so many applications. One of the things I actually like, apart from being able to cut pesticide use, and there I disagree a little bit with that slide, is that I think we'll actually be able to use this to go away from monoculture. Right now we use monoculture in agriculture. Why? Does nature like it? No, nature does not like it. You know who likes monoculture? Diseases like monoculture, and so we need to use pesticides. But you can suddenly imagine if robots and drones can go in and take care of individual plants, what's to stop us from creating now fields that have a tomato plant here, a carrot plant here, a potato plant here? The only reason why we don't have that is because it wasn't efficient, but now we can. This is also a slide that you just saw. We actually have great startups at EPFL right in this domain. Media, I don't need to tell you, but Netflix, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, and so on have completely changed our behavior. They will continue to change our behavior. We will soon see personalized TV shows and things like that. This is the media landscape. You can see newspapers had a really good run for about 50 years, and then in 2000 something happened. That something is, of course, the internet. The whole thing collapsed. Google and Facebook took up the tab. By the way, Google and Facebook are advertising companies. It's often forgotten, but it doesn't matter. All companies are tech companies. Science, which is what many of you are here for. I'm showing you two examples here from an area that I care about deeply, which is genetics. So this thing here, plugged into this computer, is actually a DNA sequencer. DNA sequencers used to be, they still are, big machines that fill half rooms, cost a fortune. This thing is half the size of this, plugs right into your computer, costs $1,000. This company is now working on a new version that you don't even need to plug into your computer anymore, but you can plug it directly into your phone. And some of my colleagues are using this to go out into the field, to Brazil, for example, where you have a Zika outbreak. You can sequence the Zika genomes right right there in the field for very cheap, upload it to the internet, boom, everybody has that information. On the top right here, on the right, not top, but right, you can see the cost of DNA sequencing collapsing faster than Moore's law. It used to cost literally billions to sequence human DNA. Now it costs less than $1,000. It will cost less than $100 pretty soon, and your next generation in 20 years will sit here and think, what's the big deal? This stuff is basically free. 23andMe is a company that was started 11 years ago in the US, personalized genetics. You order a kit, you get a little tube, you spit in, you send it back. A few days later, you get access code online. You can see health reports, ancestry, and so on. Stupid idea, a lot of people used to say. Now, they have 5 million human genomes stored in their databases. It's one of the largest DNA databases. These guys can now do research that even the best funded labs cannot do because they have access to that data. On this side, they're making a nice living because they're generating a lot of money. So who's stupid now? All right, another example. AI, I'm sure you have heard about this. Google, with this company that they bought, DeepMind, built a system that beat the best Go player. Go being a very hard game to beat. Chess, easy, happened 20 years ago. Go, still hard. So they beat it 4-1. Then a year later, they developed an algorithm that beat the human 100-0. Then a few weeks, they announced an algorithm that within 4 hours learned to play Go, beat the best algorithm, beat the algorithm that beat the algorithm that beat the human, and as a hobby, learned to play chess and beat the best chess computer, of course, because humans are really not good at this anymore compared to computers. And then another thing that I like to show, and I think this doesn't work now, but if I could somehow click on this, then you would see this bike changing in form, and this is actually an idea I stole from Pierre van der Geinst, where you can see machines being creative, coming up with new ideas for slides. For slides? Did I say for slides? For bikes. So, why does almost all of this technology come from the US? I mean, you've seen almost all the examples that I mentioned. There's somehow a US company involved. Why is that? Are they so much smarter? No, I can guarantee you that's not the case. Or all equally smart. But there's something about that that just doesn't happen here, and that I would really love to see here much more. This gentleman here on your left is Tim Berners-Lee. I hope you recognize him. Around your birth, probably a bit before, he invented this thing called the World Wide Web. Around the corner, literally, in an office at CERN. Is Geneva worldwide known as the hub of the internet? No. Here's another one. Long short-term memory. This is a paper by Sepp Hochreiter, Jürgen Schmidhuber, who was also here at the Applied Machine Learning Days last year, on something called long short-term memory. If you don't know what this is, it's an ingredient of artificial intelligence algorithms that now powers pretty much any run-of-the-mill artificial intelligence structure. Every time you use Google, you use Apple, Siri for anything, it runs on this technology. Munich, Lugano, Switzerland, are these the hotspots of AI now? No, they're not. So we really have to ask ourselves, why does this not happen much more here? And people will give you a lot of excuses and a lot of reasons why. And I think most of them are either not true or already fixed. I think actually very often it comes down to one thing, and that's kind of attitude and culture. And it's perhaps also no mistake or no accident that this, which is probably the most famous advertising slogan the world has ever seen, has come out of the US, and it's something I think we can take a piece from and just get on with this attitude and just do it. And not only invent the technology, but also use it and help spread its adoption. So, in the final 10 or 12 minutes that I have, I want to give you sort of 10 easy rules. I kind of like these lists. 10 things you need to do before you die. So 10 easy advices that I will give to you to sort of instill this spirit and this enthusiasm. Totally personal, totally subjective. So the first one, imagine using technology to make the world a better place, and then do it. That seems like a trivial thing to say, but I often find that here, and by here I mean to mostly Europe a little bit, this is still something that people take every opportunity to ridicule if they hear that. It's like, oh, so naive, so cute, make the world a better place. Go into the real world and learn how it works. No. Just imagine using technology to make the world a better place, and then do it. It's that simple. So don't give in to cynicism, which is rampant. Don't give in to destructive criticism. It's good to have your ideas checked and to have your ideas exposed to constructive criticism, but cynicism is a poison you should avoid. Destructive criticism, also poison you should avoid. So, imagine using technology to make the world a better place. Okay, but what? And so there's many ways you can do this, but one recipe I found quite helpful, and I think a lot of people, when you sort of talk to them who have invented great things, use this recipe. Try to predict what the world will look like in 5 to 10 years. Not 2 years, that's a bit too close, things will happen too fast. Not 20 years, because who knows, it's too far away. But try to see what the world will look like in 5 to 10 years, and then build something for that future. Something that a lot of people, in my view, do wrong, and I don't mean this in a negative sense, it's totally fine if you do that, but there's an alternative to a model that says, oh, this thing, everybody's over here, this is really interesting, this is where it's happening, I need to be on this as well. Can be fine, because there's reasons that people are here and that something must be happening. But this is not where it will necessarily be happening in 5 to 10 years. It's over here where there are a few crazy people with crazy ideas that think this thing will be big in 5 to 10 years. And then it will be. Sometimes it won't, but sometimes it will be. And this is incredibly important. I think this is a great recipe. You have this little idea that tomorrow will be a big idea. And because of that, rule number 3 is very important. You really have to protect your idea. And by protection, I don't mean IP, non-disclosure agreements. What I mean is protect it from yourself mostly, because you will be very tempted to throw it away because everybody's over there. And the thing you work on doesn't quite seem like the thing it's happening, but it will possibly in 5 to 10 years. You really need to nurture ideas, and you also need to protect them from the people who will just ignore it and say, I'm sorry, what is this? And the cynics, stupid idea. Protect your ideas and nurture them. They're the most valuable things. Have you ever thought about what it must have been like for Tim Berners-Lee to invent the World Wide Web with like 2 pages? That's what the web looked like when he invented it. So protect your ideas and nurture them. While you do that, people will always come to you. This is sort of the quintessential question, especially around here, but generally. What is this for? Why are you doing this? What's the point of this? And there are many good answers to this question. I just want to tell you that because I can do it is a perfectly acceptable answer. Certainly at university. Perfectly acceptable. You don't have to come up with some crazy idea why this is going to be so much better and will save people necessarily money. For the moment, you can just say, I can do it. That's why I do it. This looks pretty interesting. Actually, most ideas start like that, even the ones that go on to make their inventors incredibly wealthy. We're humans, we're natural thinkers. We really like that. Oh, here's something, let me take it apart. What does it look like? Ah, that's interesting. Here's something else. What happens if I put this and then I take this? Like, don't justify every single step with some kind of return on investment. Just play. I'm going to come to a totally other point that seems to just completely be the opposite of what I said. But I nevertheless find asking this question, how do I make money with this, or even just how do I bring this to more people, is a question you should ask yourself much faster. And that's something that's not often said in Switzerland or in Europe, which is kind of funny because we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, yet we don't like to talk about money. But when you ask this question relatively quickly, at least when you see things are really working, then you can take ownership, much more ownership. Because the great thing about money is it's a resource, it helps you shape things. Because if you don't, then others will do it. And this is exactly what happened with the web. The reason why the World Wide Web is now completely in the hands of US corporations is not because it was invented in a secret lab in the US. It's because they were the guys who were the first to see, hey, this thing could be big. We should invest. Okay, this is maybe a bit controversial, and I work here, so we'll see if I have a job tomorrow. Don't overestimate universities. I think I will have a job tomorrow because of rule number 7. Don't overestimate universities. What do I mean with that? I just mean this is not the real world, okay? None of the professors, or I think at least most of the professors, have not yet founded, multi-billion dollar companies. Million, yes, but not multi-billion dollar companies. We were selected to be here because we, I think, did great research, at least so did our peers, judges, did great research, engineering, we teach reasonably well. I hope you agree with this. And this is why we were hired. But we don't have some kind of wisdom that no one else has, okay? Your thing still has to work out in the real world. Just never forget this. It's called Ivory Tower for a reason. Of course, we're trying to break it down and become more in connection with the real world, but just never forget that. But, okay, now it's very important, rule number 7. Don't underestimate universities for exactly the reason. Yes, this is not the real world. That's exactly the point. Because in the real world, this question, why are you doing this, you will have to answer all the time. And ideally for the next quarterly financial reports. You don't have this, well, you have it a little bit, but you don't have it as strongly as the university. So you can tinker, you can play, you can say, I can play with this stuff because I can. And this is exactly the reason why so many things are invented at universities. And it's also exactly the reason that most thriving universities emerge, most thriving economies emerge around the universities. It's no accident that we now have a booming economy here with great startups. It's no accident that tech companies like Google moved to Zurich. It's no accident that Silicon Valley is spanned by major world-class universities. It's no accident that Boston is a huge hub for economic development now. All of those have really amazing universities where people were allowed to tinker. And the other thing is, of course, what you very quickly will find is the best people to tinker with are other smart people. And it just so happens that the density of smart people is quite high at university. And when you take the thing and you turn it maybe into something that grows, then you will need more smart people, and also they happen to cluster around universities. So never underestimate the power of universities for that reason. So let me end on slightly sober notes, but only slightly. As has been mentioned in the beginning, I think very well, technology is a tool. It can be used for good and for bad. You learned this probably the first time when you learned to use a knife. You realized, hey, this thing is handy, it's useful, I can cut stuff so that I don't choke when I swallow it, but hey, it's also good to cut off my finger. So what did you do when that happened? Did you throw down the knife and said, I demand a ban on knives, 10-year moratorium on knives? No, of course not. I mean, you learned to use it responsibly. And your parents were smart enough to control usage. They didn't store the knives in your household next to your bed. They put it somewhere where you couldn't reach. And it's with that for everything, and it certainly is about tech. It's about access, it's about usage, it's never about the technology itself. So, that question about how deeply should you think about can your tech be used for good or for bad? I think it's an extremely hard question. I know it's the right thing to say that one should think deeply about the negative side effects, but as innovators, I think we are much more forced, and really that's what we should do, I think, to think much more about the positive. Yes, the negative will inevitably happen, but we should think much more about the positive. Because when others benefit from technology, you will benefit even more. That's a very important thing. We're used to play games, and games, I don't know if you've ever learned this already, but there's this thing called zero sum, and it means that for me to win, you have to lose, because there's only so much to go around, and only if you play chess or any other game, most of the time, somebody has to lose for another person to win. Most games are like that. But technology is not like that. The economy is not like that. When multiple people start to benefit from something, ideally, if a lot of people or almost everyone starts to benefit, you benefit even more. It's not a zero-sum game. That's very important also to reflect, because we build technology. For example, when the web was built, of course, it was a great liberator, and it should really give access and equal access to everyone. And that was great. But then again, it was used for things that were not so great. Fake news at the moment is the problem we're dealing with, or rogue regimes trying to limit access to information. So that's, again, not the problem of the technology, but how people are now using it. And I want to leave you with my all-time favorite quotes. I have a lot of favorite quotes, but nothing beats this one, which is that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world, the unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself or herself, and that is the single reason that all progress depends on the latter, namely those who try to persist and say, this thing, in 10 years, everybody's going to use it. So I hope I was able to inspire you a little bit. I know you're in the middle of one of the most brutal semesters at this school, or any school for that matter, I can guarantee. But if you occasionally get a break, and you will much more in the future, promised, then use that time to tinker, to play, to do things, to explore things just because you can. Because that's what eventually will create the major innovations that we will all profit from in a couple of years and decades. Thanks very much.
Now you can drink. Now you can drink. Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcel. Merci. Et donc, nous avons 25 minutes pour les questions. Et voilà. Tout le monde s'en va. Sympa. Ok, ceux qui sont encore là, je suis sûre, profitez de l'occasion. Donc, il y a des gens avec des micros. Il faut faire signe pour qu'on vous voit un peu correctement. Première question.
Everything's so clear.
Everything's done. Okay.
When you said that the reason why the US is the country where most innovations come from, do you really think this reason was only the mentality as you said it, or is there something else that there's only in the US and not in other countries?
Where do I look?
I have no idea where he is. Okay. Là.
Okay. Thank you. So I didn't mean to say, it always comes from the US. I think we see it comes from many different places, but nevertheless, I think we experience, right, in our daily lives that a lot of these things come from the US. I think there are some common patterns. So the answers that people usually give is, outside of the one that I gave, was easy access to capital. And this was probably true, but this has changed completely. It used to be that, yeah, if you want to raise money for an idea, if you had a startup, the whole concept of a startup wasn't really existing here 20 years ago. People just did it and they didn't call it startup. Now they do, now the whole ecosystem is here. Now people say maybe, okay, you can still not do very large kind of deals, but that's also changing. So I think increasingly the only difference is in that kind of spirit. And actually, if you go to the US and you speak to those tech companies, the innovators, of course you will find that the vast majority of them are not from the US originally, but were attracted to it because there is this kind of mentality. It's something I liked a lot. I mean, there's lots of things to dislike about the US, but the thing that I like the most, especially in Silicon Valley, is that when you go there, it's just this extreme energy. But this is true, I think, for most places that are sort of innovative, and increasingly for this place as well. But this extreme energy that everybody is working on something that's going to be the next big thing. And here it's sort of this mentality of like, come on, I mean, not everything can, most of these things will not be the next big thing, so why do you care? So there it's almost, it's a bit like, it's contagion. It's really contagious. And even actually if I look at my research, I mean, don't tell this, the president and other people, but I look back, I would say some of the best work I've done there for that very reason, because every morning I would go to work, I would be just inspired and see all these people doing such great work. And so you just want to do much better work. I don't keep using this analogy. I don't know if any Italians are here, but sometimes quite often go to Turin because I have collaborators in Turin, and I always go and get a coffee just because it's divine, right? It's to die for. And you sort of wonder, what is it about this coffee? Why is it so good here? You walk into a random place, coffee is excellent. The reason is because no one would accept bad coffee, right? No one would, the system does not allow for that. And so it's the same. The system in Silicon Valley just does not allow for you to hang around and kind of do nothing. So it's sort of this extreme enthusiasm. And part of the reason I was also super attracted to come back and see, come here to EPFL is because the moment I stepped foot on this campus, I could feel that too. You can really feel that too here. And that's quite unusual. There's not yet many places in Europe. There are increasingly many, thank goodness, but not that many. And so I really do think, I know people tend to dismiss this argument a lot because, what is this culture? You cannot measure it. There's no GDP number you can put on top of it. But it is, in my experience, one of the most important things. Money you can get, there's plenty of money to go around. But finding the enthusiastic people that are just crazy and dream about new ideas and just do because they can, that's culture. So I do think it's a major, major part.
Là, il y a une personne.
Yes, I want to make just a remark on the last point you said, and you meant that unreasonable people were the one who will build the world tomorrow. And I think that in the last years, unreasonable people made a lot of decisions and build a world that is maybe a bit dangerous. We have a lot of pollution. We have massive extinction of species, and I think the environment is in a dramatic way of evolving. So maybe when you said that the reason why you had to do something is because I can do it, I think that maybe we should better think the reason why I'm doing this is because it will make society better and it will respect nature, and I think that the sum of the impacts I'm doing will be positive on people and on my environment. And this is something I think we should keep in mind behind that we are part of environment and we are also animals and we want the best for people and nature. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So I think that there are parts of this statement with which I fully agree, and there are parts of the statements that I think is not entirely correct. And so let me explain. What I agree is you basically expressed, I think, my first slide, right? So think of how you can use technology to make the world a better place and try to do this, right? This was sort of the sentiment you expressed. And I think that's great. And oftentimes you actually find that the technology that you will use to do that, it's not, you can't necessarily always predict what's going to happen with it. And so if you limit the way you think about technology by the time you conceive it, by that individual thought, it may or it may not work. But there are many inventions that have been invented for completely different things than they were eventually used for, good or bad. So what I meant to express with just go ahead and do it is not because you can necessarily guarantee that in 10 years this is what's going to happen. But it's the reason why you do it in the first place. The other thing I want to remind you of is to not give in too much into that kind of negative thinking. It is true, there's some things that you can measure, especially about the environment, where things are not going well, and we need people to take care of this. Nobody in their right mind would reject that. But it is also true that in many, many measures that you can do, starting from poverty, starting from access to education, access to healthy water, access to nutritious foods, the world is getting better and better and better. I know it's sometimes really hard to believe that, because the media, of course, thrives on negative stories. But by and large, the evidence that technology has made the world a better place is unrefutable. So yes, that doesn't mean that there are no problems, but never forget that most of the time technology has been used for good.
All right. First, I want to thank you for your I want to thank you for your presentation. The topic was really interesting, talking about innovation and impact. However, actually, the ecosystem in EPFL in studies is tremendously hard. And basically, doing as you do and doing side projects that could have an impact afterwards, this can mean failing the semester and going home. So how does one do, as you say, while still passing some very difficult exams? And,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, no easy answer to that. So like I said, principally, right, giving this kind of advice to second semester students is a bit tricky, exactly for that reason. I mean, I think your load at the moment is extreme. I just meant it. I mean, there's still a lot of time, right, that people have on their hands, and you can do with that time, of course, whatever you want to. But as you go on, and then later, if you go on, doing a PhD, you nevertheless find you actually have quite a bit of time on your hand to do things on the side, and that's, by the way, also something I would highly recommend. There's often this notion that people, if they want to follow their idea, they should really abandon everything, because if it's really your idea, I mean, you should really do it full time. I don't think that's true. Again, if you sort of look at the history of innovation and of major breakthroughs, that's true for some things. And do we love these stories? Do we love the media stories, right? Of the people who lost everything, and then in the last minute, the great thing happened. Great story, makes great press, but in reality, a lot of things happened as kind of side projects that people were just passionate about. And so, I fully see that maybe in the second semester you don't quite have the liberty to do that, but you nevertheless find you will have some time, and that's especially true in the future. But frankly, it's also something that I'm quite mindful about, and I will try to raise my voice about this too much. Certainly don't want to get into any when I was your age kind of stories, but I still have to say that when I was a student, I had much more free time at my hands that allowed me to go and have a job on the side and sort of as a side effect, learn how to program and develop for the web which completely informed all my work that I did later. If I probably, okay, this may be a bit contentious, but I sometimes think if I had had the load that you guys have today, I'm not sure I could have done that. My life would maybe have taken a completely direction, maybe even for the better. Hard to imagine right now, but maybe. So it's always hard to say that. But I'm extremely mindful about that, that there should be plenty of time for students during a 4-year curriculum to just tinker and play and experiment.
Là, il y a 2 questions.
Hello. Oh.
Je vois pas où vous êtes. On voit pas où vous êtes. La personne qui a le micro peut faire des mouvements. Ah.
Hello.
À gauche.
Okay, so this is going to be a pretty pessimistic view, but...
A what view?
A pessimistic view.
Oh, pessimistic view.
Yeah. Of course, like my question is, as future engineers and inventors, I see, say, cryptocurrency mining that's taking so much energy. I see social media addiction. I see people using social media and the internet to influence elections and even election meddling and stuff like that. How can we, as future engineers and inventors, prevent our technologies that we will develop from getting out of control? I'm also thinking about, say, war machines, automated war machines that could kill people without, there being anyone behind the controls. How can we prevent that from happening in the future? Because some of us will definitely invent something that could potentially be dangerous, and I just wonder how you see. Yeah. How could we prevent that from happening?
Okay, so I mean, I think this is a great question, and I think it's worthwhile that you keep asking this question. But still, right? I mean, this question alone cannot drive you, because otherwise you will never do anything, because something bad could happen. And so I think you just need to find a balance. And I think one of the teams that won the poster awards, I think it was the one with the drones in agriculture, had like one of these quotes that, okay, who controls the data, controls agriculture, something like that. That to me is also exactly the reason why I said I think it would be beneficial for us here if those of you, and this is a very selfish view, but if those of you who invent these things would do it here. Because otherwise it is exactly that we then have to import all of this stuff from outside where we have absolutely no control over. Our president, right, keeps on saying that we are on the way, or in fact have become digital colonies of the US. And I think it's for that reason. And if 20 years ago, more people would have had, I'm certainly not going to blame anyone, okay? I mean, you can always rewind and say if they had, but I nevertheless have a hunch that if we had had that culture 20 years ago, the world would look a little bit better. And this is why I'm trying to instill this hunch into you. I mean, some may reject it, but this is a completely subjective view. But my hope is that if some of you have that attitude, then in 20 years the situation will be better. Those who build the technology, those who own the technology, are the ones who shape it, right? And this is also what at the moment worries me a lot about the discussion around technology. And this should concern you too. I mean, you are at a technical school. You have technology in the title of your school. Presumably this is why you came, because you like technology, you want to understand technology, you want to build technology maybe one day, science, technology. Yet we seem to be at a stage where technology is seen increasingly as a potential force for bad. And you can find things like 5 years ago, you would read the newspapers and it would say, oh, this great tech company, this great tech company, this great tech company. Now it's saying we should break these guys apart. These guys are destroying our democracy. These guys are doing that. And it's looking increasingly bad, and it's something that worries me. There was even an article that said 2017, tech workers are the 2008 Wall Street bankers. So as you probably remember, or at least have read, 2008 was a very bad year where the Wall Street bankers basically, screwed the system for all of us. We all had to pay, and so that job of a Wall Street banker sort of became a very negative thing. You didn't want to be a Wall Street banker at that time. And now the worry is that more and more people see technology, people working in technology and that. And that I find deeply concerning and deeply, should worry us. It's one thing I'm actually pessimistic, I'm ready to worry, right? Is because if we don't get that under control and if we don't change the narrative of this and demonstrate again and again that, look, technology is mostly used for good, it can be used for good, here it's been used for good, here it's been used for good, here it's been used for good. I think that's our job to do. It's our job to do. Also, for example, many of the examples that you mentioned are actually not new. Fake news have been around for quite some time. I'm very sorry that the Americans feel their elections have been influenced, but they also kind of invented election influencing. I mean, it's not totally new, right, as a phenomenon. So now that we see these technologies being used for these things, yeah, it will always be used by bad actors if you have a powerful technology. But our response cannot be, we should therefore not do it. Our response should even more be, it should be us who does it. It should be us who sort of pushes it forward, because then, and only then, we can influence it. You can only play the game from the offensive, not from the defensive. Or win it, at least.
2 questions here.
Hello.
Hi.
So what I understand from your point of view is that you would like to import the American way of thinking in Europe.
No, more sort of the pioneering spirit. It can come from Italy, don't care.
Okay, so my question is, I see in what you are saying a lot of similarities with like the French president who is also trying, to import the American spirit in France. Like, hey, this is innovation. And
pioneering spirit.
So my question is now, okay, isn't it like too late? Isn't it an outdated way of thinking? Because if we look at now the Silicon Valley, it's quite the opposite. You have the GAFAs, which is absolutely not startups, and there is not this liberalism like way of thinking where startups can thrive. And now you have these huge companies. And do you think if you want to copy something, this is that, because we can skip ahead?
Yeah. So I agree with you in that sense. Definitely, by pioneering spirit, I don't mean let's have these extremely large companies that squash all competition. I think that's just sort of a negative side effect. And it's also not new. It seems now that Apple and Google are unbeatable, but they're not. There have been technology companies that had much more relative power. They are sort of really strong in terms of absolute numbers, but in terms of relative power, there were other companies before that where people thought, that's it, there's never going to be another technology company. IBM was that company. I mean, you have maybe seen that famous video, 1984, from this Apple ad back in the day. That's really how people felt about IBM. It's like it's absolutely inconvincible giant. Same with Microsoft. I mean, 20 years ago, Microsoft seemed absolutely unstoppable. So I think you have many companies like this, and the system just keeps on changing. So there's nothing, I think, very special about these particular companies. Some of them will be more irrelevant in the future. Others will be super irrelevant that don't even exist yet. Silicon Valley, I think, is an interesting case because from the European perspective, again, we have to realize this, otherwise we're making the same mistake that we accuse people of. We are getting very filtered news. We're getting very filtered news about Silicon Valley and about the US, just as they get totally filtered news about us. This has not changed, and as the fake news scandal has shown, this has maybe even accelerated. So there are certainly things, the sort of cutthroat competition that I did not like at all. This idea that you need to think at the age of 3 which university you're going to subscribe to, which sport you should learn as a 3-year-old, because if it's which NGO you should start as a 12-year-old because you want to get into Stanford, which is going to cost you $100,000. I mean, all of these things are absolutely horrible, and I would not want to import any of those. So by all means, I mean, when I say, let's bring in some of that pioneering spirit, I really only mean that pioneering spirit. I'm not saying, let us blindly copy everything the US does. That would be incredibly stupid.
So one question over here, and maybe last one afterwards, there, here. Yeah.
Yes.
Là, à droite.
Thank you very much for this inspiring speak. I'd just like to say, you talked very much about technology and the positive possible effects of technology on society, but I'd like to bring maybe another point here, because we are in a university, and in my point of view, the role of a university is to deal with, in fact, science at first. And maybe, putting insisting on the fact that technology can bring positive effects, but can bring also a lot of unpredictability is a thing. But the major thing to say, I think, in a university is that science can contribute to reduce a lot that unpredictability. And you insisted a lot on the fact that people here in the room must be inspired by messages like, be crazy, do it, be unreasonable, go for it, etc. But I think you can be an engineer, political scientist, anything. You must at first think about the virtue of science and its potential to reduce the risks that we are facing tomorrow, and talking about technological development or environment or anything. And I didn't hear you speak for 1 second about science, and I'd like to know what you think about that.
Yeah.
And
I
don't think it's destructive criticism here. Just
No, obviously, I'm all about science.
On the contrary, quite constructive.
No, I mean, I'm all about science, and I've showed a few examples of the science domain, and then the sort of personal pieces of advices that I gave are sort of independent of the domain, right? This can be something that's scientific as well. I anyways find sort of the difference between science and engineering is anyways getting blurrier and blurrier by the day. So
But science is about reason, not unreason.
Yes. Reason, but I think reason is kind of a big word with lots of interpretation. I think when you say we should first think about the negative effects this could have, I don't agree with that.
I said we should prevent them.
Yeah, I don't think we should do most of our work from a defensive point of view. Depends a little bit on the problem, of course. If I want to develop a vaccine, I'm thinking about defense against diseases and pathogens. But if I'm developing the web, I'm not thinking about something defensive. And the web is a good example because it's led to ultimately much better science. Because it can now be shared much faster, it can share it much more widely. And I could give you hundreds of examples like this. The two things are totally disconnected. Most of the scientists that have invented things that were then eventually breakthroughs, and that of course I agree with you, are in that sense reasonable, were very unreasonable in their approach. Worked on problems that people called unreasonable, unimportant. Why are you doing this? History of science is full of such examples. There are also counterexamples, of course, of someone who just labors at the same problem and it's a predictable problem and one day, great breakthrough. But very often the people who make big breakthroughs are sort of working on very sort of niche things that are not necessarily the reasonable thing to do. I think CRISPR, again, is now a good example. I mean, nobody discovered CRISPR by saying, how can I prevent science or technology from growing bad? It was just sort of a tinkering. It's like, I wonder how this works. I wonder how bacteria defend themselves against bacteriophages. And then they discovered that system. So I think those two things are absolutely not exclusive. They're absolutely not exclusive of each other.
So I think we should take the last question over here. We're over time.
Yes. Hello. I like your way, the way you see things, and for that I want to elaborate on the second student that said question. The second question.
What was the second one?
Yeah, he said we had way too much work to do things on the side.
Yep.
And I like your way of seeing things and how you should choose ideas that drive you. And I think saying we have too much work and, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed by work, I cannot do anything else but just my analysis series. I don't think this is something that can drive you. And when you have like good time management, like I'm not a pro, I'm not a professional, but I see many students that have side projects that are not geniuses, that can manage the time well and manage to do other projects other than just work and work and work for university. And yes, that's why I wanted to say that we shouldn't say just we have too much work, we cannot do anything else. Maybe that's the case, but saying it won't do much better. And so my question for you was, we talked about culture differences between Silicon Valley and USA in general and Europe. And why do you think is that, and how do we change it? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an entirely different, hour, which we don't have. But maybe very briefly, I think there's something to the theory. So if you actually look a bit at the history of the Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley, by the way, may move, right? I think it's also very important to never forget that Silicon Valley is not a place, right? It's sort of a state of mind, a way that people work. It's quite likely, I think, that it will move. My prediction is that it will move to LA, but we can see in 10 years if that prediction is true. I think part of the reason is you look at the history, how things have been financed sort of in the 50s, and then with the invention of the transistors and money flowing into that, and then suddenly having this network of people working on technology, and then new people being attracted to it and finding a very fertile ground. That's extremely important. That's always the hardest thing to do in the beginning. when there's so many people say, okay, we want to create something here, now how do we start it? That's really the hardest part, because once you have this critical mass, then outside people are attracted. They say, I have this crazy idea I want to follow. I really should go to this place. And so, again, as I mentioned, I think EPFL is slowly becoming that reputation, which will benefit us a lot in the region. And so that's usually the hardest thing. One of the things I think that would be wrong to do is to plan this very much. I think part of the reason the thing there works so well is because exactly it has sort of this kind of can-do attitude. And I see a lot of plans where people say, how can we recreate this here or here? Everybody wants their valley. We want our health valley. The guys in Basel also want their health valley. And the French want some other valley. And maybe there's an edtech valley. And I think just actually the number one thing that you need is a university with smart people and I'm just going to repeat myself now, where people have time to tinker, to imagine the world, how they want to see it, and if it works, to find smart people very close by. That's the best way how you can create it. That's why I think you basically, if anyone ever asks me, how can we do this more here, I say, fund more in education, fund more in in places like EPFL. There was one other thing I was going to say, but now it escaped my mind. What was the second question that you had?
That was the only question.
That was the whole question. Okay.
Also,
last comment?
I really like your shoes.
Oh, thank you.
Cool. Okay, we'll finish on that one.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Merci d'applaudir et de remercier Marcel Salathe. Voilà. Bravo aux groupes qui sont venus présenter les posters. Merci à tous pour vos questions en anglais aussi, d'avoir fait l'effort. Et bon retour, bonne soirée, bonne suite.